I find this absolutely fascinating. Just a little background. There is, here in Washington, D.C., we had, up until the last year or so, arguably the worst taxi service in the entire United States. The taxi commission and the taxi business was entirely a cash business. None of the taxi drivers took credit cards. The taxi commission was basically in the pocket of the taxi drivers, still is, I think. And the taxis were old and falling apart and run down. And everybody was surly. And if there was ever a libertarian, an example for libertarians to point to of how government doesn't work, government regulation of the taxi industry in Washington, D.C. was it. And Uber came to town 2 years ago. And when Louise and I first moved here, we don't own a car. We sold our car when we left Portland 3 years ago. And we moved here, and where we live in the public marina down in the southwest, and we're 2 blocks from the waterfront metro station. And so we walk 2 blocks and get on the train, and we can take the train to either the radio or TV studio. We're 3 blocks away from the radio studio is 3 blocks away from Union Station, which is the Red Line, and the TV studio is 1 block away from the Metro Center station, which is the Red Line. And even though we're on the Green Line, we can, anyway, it's a long story, but, we can easily take the train to work. It's a hassle because where we live, the train only comes every 20 minutes, and you got to change trains, but we can easily do it. And we did, for the first year we were here. And when we were in a hurry, we'd grab a cab. And 9 times out of 10, well, actually, we had some really miserable experiences with cabs. 2 years ago when Louise was going through chemo, she was sick as a dog, and her hospital, or her doctor's office and hospital was just over the border in Maryland. And the way that they've drawn the taxi things, a D.C. taxi driver can take you out to Maryland, but they can't pick up a fare in Maryland and bring them back. They have to come back into the city of D.C. before they can pick up a fare. And so they don't like to do that. And so on 2 different occasions when she was going to get chemo and she was like so sick she could hardly walk, she'd get in a cab, they'd drive a block or 2 as they're talking about where she wants to go. She would finally tell them, they would stop and kick her out of the cab. Kicked her out of the cab in some of the just scariest neighborhoods in this town. And, I mean, this is how bad the taxi business was in D.C. It's improved somewhat, the taxi commission. But, when Uber came to town and we started using Uber. It's less, the Uber X, the small local cars are actually less expensive than cabs. The black cars are just slightly more expensive than cabs. And this basically forced the taxi business to get its act together. And so the taxi commission mandated that all the cabs begin taking credit cards. So now they all take credit cards. And they're starting to, fix them so that when you get in, they don't smell of exhaust, and they actually have shock absorbers that work, and their seats don't have, knife marks in them and stuffing sticking out. And occasionally the cab driver will actually talk to you instead of grunting at you. Although there's still, we have taken cabs a few times in the last 6 months, and we've had some really nice cab drivers, and we've had some just horror stories. Never had a bad story with Uber. Well, the same thing has happened in aviation. And this is where it gets really interesting. I read this article in the New York Times about a year ago about how because the way Uber works, at least the way it started out, is there's all these limousine drivers who, they're paid quite a bit to drive somebody someplace. They may make, $100 for a 20-minute trip, and then they wait 3 hours for the next trip. It's a high-end business, but there's a lot of sitting around and waiting. And so the idea, Uber was created by a guy who was a or a limo driver along with a couple of software friends. The idea was, let's give these guys something to do in their spare time. And so they created this app where you can just order up a limousine that just happens to be between jobs, and they pick you up, take you someplace, your credit card's on file, boom, it's all very simple. No tips, it's all built in. and ding it right to your credit card. You don't have to handle any cash, and it's very nice. So somebody looked at the fleet. There's something like 15,000 private airports in the United States, like Teterboro, these small airports. Every city has them that are private jet airports that are used exclusively by rich people. And a lot of rich people own their own private jets, or they lease them, or there are companies that lease them. But there's a lot of private jet capacity, free capacity. And there was this company called Blackjet, and I signed up for it just to see what it was. I've never used it. But every week I get an email. The one I just got today, upcoming jets, Aspen, Colorado to Camarillo, California, Austin, Texas to San Diego, Bedford, Oklahoma City. These are, this is a Lear 45XR, Boston, Orlando, a Citation CJ3, Burbank to Miami, a Gulfstream 4, and on the list goes. It's a long, long list. And Washington, D.C. to Miami and a Gulfstream 4, Washington, D.C. to St. Louis, Missouri, and a Citation XL. And the cool thing is, it's just like Uber. You just say, yeah, I'll take this seat. Now, a first-class seat on an airplane from here to Miami might cost you $1,200, $1,500. If you want to go on the jet, it'll cost you $1,600, $1,800, maybe $2,000. But you're on a private jet. And you go out to an airport that has no TSA, no security. You just walk on the jet with whatever luggage you may have, whoever you may be. And Blackjet's not the only company that's doing this. There's 5 of them now. And plus, anybody can charter a jet. And there's no security. Which raises the question. There's thousands and thousands of these private jet flights available every day. The 9/11 hijackers all bought full-fare first-class tickets. They all paid over $1,000 for each of their tickets, so they could sit in the front of the plane, near where they could get to the cockpit. So, but, now it doesn't work to take down commercial planes because the cockpit doors are hardened, and the passengers are so hypersensitized from Flight 93 that, they've taken down drunks, right? There's been a dozen stories in the last couple of years where somebody was just drunk, stoned, or schizophrenic on an airplane, and the passengers ended up, jumping on the guy or the woman and tying them to their seat, and the plane got diverted. And in fact, there was one where they took down a flight attendant. Remember that? A flight attendant was having a nervous breakdown, and a bunch of passengers piled on top of her. So I think the days of somebody hijacking a commercial airliner are all over. And by the way, if somebody wanted to do it, the easy way to do it would just be to sign up for one of these services like Blackjet. These are jets too. They can fly to buildings too. You can carry on a suitcase with 40, 50 pounds of high explosives. Nobody would even know. Make a hell of a big hole in anything you wanted to hit. So why are we still doing the TSA? I'm going to give you a little more background on this because there's a libertarian meme out there that we should privatize, that we should, do away with the TSA. And then there's a sub-debate underneath that of maybe we should go back to the way it was in the 1970s when there was no airport security whatsoever versus the libertarian meme that individual airlines should provide their security and compete on it.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And with these private jet services, there's no security whatsoever. And they're competing very successfully. So, really, what are we doing?